It's been the worst time of my life, Joe. If somebody accused me of raping them or hurting them, I have a 22-year-old daughter. I would never hurt anyone.
Breaking news has shaken Hollywood. Clifton Powell's sentence is final. From a tough childhood in Southeast D.C. to blockbuster roles in Friday and Ray, Powell built a name.
There are actors whose faces you know before you ever learn their names. You've seen them in a dozen movies, laughed at their timing, feared their glare, trusted them instantly the moment they walked into frame. And yet, if someone asked you to name them, you might come up blank. Clifton Powell is one of those actors. For more than 30 years, he's been a fixture of American film and television, a performer directors call on when they need a scene to feel real. But behind the steady stream of memorable roles is a life that has been anything but steady, a story of survival, reinvention, public scrutiny, and quiet resilience that rarely gets told in full. This is that story. Long before sound stages and film premieres, Clifton Powell was a kid trying to make it through another day in Southeast Washington, D.C., a neighborhood that, in the years he grew up there, offered very little room for error. Poverty was constant, opportunity was scarce, and the paths available to young men around him too often led somewhere dark. Dead ends, prison cells, or worse. Powell's foundation was shaken early. His mother died when he was only 4 years old, leaving him to be raised primarily by his father, a man who battled alcoholism and struggled to give his son the structure and stability a young child needs. It's the kind of loss that can define or derail a life. For Powell, it became something he had to constantly work against, leaning on whatever family support and mentorship he could find to avoid being swallowed by the streets around him. He has talked about those years candidly in interviews over the decades, watching friends get pulled into trouble, understanding early on that survival meant discipline, and holding on to whatever slim threads connected him to a different kind of future. That grit, the ability to keep moving forward despite instability, will become the through line of his entire life, on screen and off. Powell's entry into acting wasn't a straight, easy climb. Like most character actors, he built his career one small part at a time, taking whatever roles came his way and making sure each one left an impression. It paid off. In 1993, Powell landed a role in Menace II Society, the Hughes brothers' unflinching drama about life in South Central Los Angeles. The film was raw, urgent, and unlike much of what studios were putting out at the time, and Powell's performance was part of what gave its authenticity. Audiences and casting directors took notice. From there, his career diversified in a way that few actors manage. He became a familiar face in the Friday franchise, bringing comedic timing that made him a fan favorite in a series already stacked with memorable characters. That's the range that came to define Powell. He could terrify an audience in one film and have them laughing in the next. Directors began to see him as someone who could handle almost anything: a hardened criminal, a loving father, a hustler, a cop, a mentor. He wasn't boxed into one type of role because he refused to let himself be limited to one note. By 2004, Powell had reached a new level of recognition. He appeared in Ray, the Oscar-winning biopic about Ray Charles starring Jamie Foxx, playing Jeff Brown, Charles's loyal road manager. It was a smaller role in a film full of big performances, but Powell made it count, enough that he earned a nomination for an NAACP Image Award. Standing alongside a cast that included some of the industry's most respected names, Powell had proven, once again, that his work spoke for itself. Over the following years, his filmography kept expanding. Dead Presidents, Why Do Fools Fall in Love, Rush Hour, Next Friday, and dozens of other film and television projects. By the time all was said and done, Powell had amassed more than 100 acting credits, a body of work most performers can only dream of. He had become, in the truest sense, one of Hollywood's most dependable character actors, the guy directors called when they needed someone to walk into a scene and make it feel completely real. For all his professional success, Powell's life off-screen was far more turbulent than his public image suggested, and nothing tested him more than the events that began in the late summer of 2011. That year, a woman using the pseudonym Connie Myers came forward with an accusation against Powell stemming from an encounter in a New Orleans hotel room. According to her account, the interaction began consensually but escalated into something she said crossed a line, and she claimed that when she asked him to stop, he did not. Myers, who worked as a cocktail waitress at Harrah's Casino at the time, filed a complaint that quickly made its way into entertainment media. Outlets like TMZ picked up the story, and almost overnight, Powell's name was attached to one of the most serious allegations a person can face. Powell denied the accusation from the very beginning through a representative. He issued a statement calling the claims false and said he intended to pursue every legal option available to him. But as anyone who's watched a public figure navigate an accusation knows, denial doesn't undo the damage that's already been set in motion. Even after the initial criminal investigation was dropped for lack of evidence, the story didn't disappear. Myers went on to file a civil suit against Powell, seeking damages in excess of $75,000. That civil case would go on to consume years of Powell's life. Civil litigation operates under a different, lower standard than criminal court. Instead of proving guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, the question becomes whether it's more likely than not that the claims are true. For anyone in the public eye, that's a precarious position to be in, because the mere existence of a lawsuit can shape public perception regardless of its outcome. Powell later said the hardest part wasn't the legal process itself, but everything that came with it. The loss of work, the erosion of trust, and the sense that many people had already reached their own verdict long before any court did. And the industry reacted the way it often does. Hollywood is built on image and marketability, and studios tend to move quickly to distance themselves from anything that smells like controversy. For Powell, that meant real, immediate professional consequences. Projects he'd already been cast in quietly disappeared. Producers who might have booked him grew hesitant. He has spoken about one television role in particular that he expected to appear in for 7 or 8 episodes, only to be written out after 2, with no real explanation offered beyond the shadow the allegations had cast over his name. The emotional cost, by his own account, was even heavier than the professional one. Powell has described that period as among the most painful of his life, rivaling the grief of losing his father years earlier. As a parent himself, he said the accusations cut in a particularly personal way, not just because of what they implied about him, but because of how his own children might one day read about it. He maintained his innocence throughout, but there was no shielding his family from the whispers and the assumptions that followed them. The case dragged on for 4 years. In 2017, it was finally dismissed for insufficient evidence. By 2018, Powell's own countersuit for defamation and emotional distress was dismissed as well, closing the matter for good in the eyes of the law. But even in that resolution, Powell was left facing an uncomfortable truth. The courts had cleared him, but the years of professional damage the case caused were not something a dismissal could hand back. Roles lost, momentum interrupted, relationships in the industry strained. None of that reversed itself just because the legal chapter closed. It's a stark illustration of something true across the entertainment world. Perception can move faster and linger longer than the facts ever do. Powell's career wasn't only shaped by scandal and legal battles. It was also shaped by something structural, something he's been candid about for years: colorism within the entertainment industry. He has recounted, in more than one interview, being told directly by producers and executives that he was too dark for certain roles, in at least one instance, that his complexion might scare viewers. That kind of rejection, repeated over the course of a career, forces an actor to reckon with an uncomfortable question. Does talent even matter if the first thing decision-makers see is skin tone? Hollywood has long operated on the assumption that audiences relate more easily to actors who fit narrower, often Eurocentric standards of appeal. And that assumption has historically pushed darker-skinned black actors toward a narrower set of roles, frequently villains or tough, threatening archetypes, while keeping them out of roles built around warmth, romance, or vulnerability. The contradiction in Powell's own career makes the point sharply. He was praised repeatedly for his ability to bring menace and intensity to a role, but when a script called for tenderness or sensitivity, that same skin tone that made him convincing as a threat was suddenly treated as a liability. It's a double standard that limited how far his range was allowed to be seen, even as his talent clearly extended well beyond the boxes he was often placed in. Powell has also spoken about the toll that public infighting within the black entertainment community can take, particularly when disagreements spill into mainstream press that's already primed to be dismissive of black artists. In one notable moment, he found himself at odds with director Spike Lee after Lee made comments Powell felt were unnecessarily harsh toward a fellow black actor. Powell pushed back publicly, saying he had no respect, not for himself, not for his own son or daughter, for anyone who would take a disagreement to crossover press and tear down another black performer trying to make it in an already difficult industry. It was a statement rooted in a broader philosophy, that infighting only reinforces the very barriers the industry already puts up, and that solidarity matters more than ever in an environment with so few opportunities to begin with. Seen in that light, his NAACP Image Award nomination for Ray carries extra weight. It wasn't just a nod for one strong performance. It was, in Powell's own framing, a rare moment where the industry recognizes work without qualification, without the usual caveats about marketability or fit. It stood as proof that his contributions couldn't be waved away, even in a system that had spent years trying to narrow what he was allowed to be on screen. Away from cameras and casting rooms, Powell's personal life carried its own weight, much of it self-described, and much of it delivered with a rare degree of honesty for someone in his position. He married Kimberly Powell and, for a time, built what looked from the outside like a stable family life. But the demands of a working actor's schedule, constant travel, long stretches on set, the pressures and temptations that come with visibility, put real strain on the marriage. Eventually, it ended. Powell has said the divorce cost him roughly $5 million, a blow that came at a stage of life when many of his peers were thinking about winding down, not rebuilding. He's been unusually forthright about his own role in that unraveling. In interviews, Powell has acknowledged that his focus on work, paired with a pull of fame, meant he wasn't as present in his children's lives as he should have been. "I wasn't there for my children like I should have been," he said, a simple admission, but not an easy one to make publicly. He's talked about the math of it in blunt terms. Being away 50% of the time might have been sustainable, but being away 70% of the time wasn't. That kind of self-awareness, he's noted, came later than he would have liked, after the strain had already done its damage to his marriage and his relationship with his kids. Powell has also spoken openly about gambling, admitting to losses in a range of $30,000 to $50,000 a year at various points in his career. It's the kind of habit that can look manageable from the outside for a working actor, but compounds quickly, especially layered on top of the financial strain of a divorce. He's also acknowledged the more familiar hazards of celebrity, being surrounded by people who were drawn less to who he was and more to what he could offer them. Fleeting relationships, transactional friendships, a lifestyle that could feel exciting in the moment but left him more exposed than he realized at the time. What makes Powell's story worth telling isn't just a list of setbacks. It's a gap between what audiences saw and what he was actually living through. On screen, he was commanding, funny, intimidating, dependable, an actor who always delivered. Off screen, during some of these same years, he was navigating financial loss, family strain, and the fallout of a legal battle that would follow him for the better part of a decade. That dissonance between public image and private reality is, in many ways, the story of a working actor in Hollywood more broadly. But Powell has been willing to talk about it in a way that a lot of performers never do. What stands out most about Clifton Powell's story isn't any single chapter, the hard childhood, the legal battle, the discrimination he faced, or the personal losses he's spoken about. It's that none of it stopped him. He kept working. He kept showing up. Decades after his breakout in Menace II Society, he remains one of the most recognizable character actors of his generation, someone whose filmography spans genres, decades, and every kind of role imaginable. It would have been easy, at several points along the way, for Powell's career to have simply ended, buried under an unproven accusation, narrowed by an industry that tried to define what he was allowed to play, or derailed by the very real personal struggles he's been candid about. Instead, his story is one of persistence. A man who built a life out of one of Washington, D.C.'s hardest neighborhoods, turned that resilience into a career spanning more than 100 credits, and kept working through some of the most difficult years a person can face, public or private. Clifton Powell's name may not always be the first one moviegoers reach for, but his face, and the honesty with which he's talked about the life behind it, has left a mark on Hollywood that's impossible to overlook.